In the gleaming towers of San Francisco's tech district, a man in a worn sweater outfit was moments away from facing the most humiliating week of his professional life. What started as a simple Monday morning orientation quickly turned into chaos when a dismissive team lead made her move against the new hire. But Martin Quinn wasn't just a data entry worker. For 20 years, he operated as the founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies, responsible for building a multi-million-dollar company from his garage. When Sasha Vaughn attempted to publicly humiliate him with those two devastating words, "Google it," she didn't realize she was triggering a reaction from someone trained to reshape entire corporate cultures. Martin launched a 3-day undercover investigation that unleashed consequences far beyond what anyone expected. What began as a simple request for help transformed into a complete leadership revolution. After that day, Meridian Technologies would never forget the name Quinn. Before we dive into this incredible story of hidden identity and workplace justice, tell us, where are you watching from right now? If you've ever felt underestimated at work, this story will hit close to home. Show some love with that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove respect isn't about your title, it's about your character. The glass towers of downtown San Francisco caught the Monday morning light like crystalline daggers, each floor a testament to ambition and algorithmic dreams. Martin Quinn stood at the base of the building he'd watched rise from blueprints 20 years ago, its sleek facade now foreign to him. Despite bearing his architectural fingerprints in every corner, he adjusted the collar of his worn blue sweater, costume that felt heavier than any executive suit he'd ever worn. The fabric was stiff, unfamiliar against skin that had grown accustomed to Italian wool and Egyptian cotton. But today, Martin Quinn, founder and CEO of Meridian Technologies, was nobody. Today, he was just Martin Q, the new data entry hire. The revolving doors breathed him into a world of polished concrete and exposed steel beams. Young faces glowed in the blue light of multiple monitors, fingers dancing across mechanical keyboards with the precision of concert pianists. The air hummed with the white noise of productivity coffee machines grinding, printers worry, conversations flowing in the practiced cadence of corporate efficiency. "You must be Martin." The voice belonged to Sasha Vaughn, whose approach was as sharp as her pixie cut and as calculated as her smile. She looked him up and down with the quick assessment of someone accustomed to sizing up value in seconds. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly from professional courtesy to thinly veiled disappointment. "That's me," Martin replied quietly, extending a hand that she shook with the briefest possible contact. "Right, well." She glanced at her Apple Watch, already signaling that his time was measured and limited. "I'm Sasha, team lead for data operations. I'll get you set up, but I've got back-to-back meetings today, so we'll need to move quickly." She led him through the open floor plan, past clusters of standing desks where 20-somethings in athleisure were tracked metrics on dual monitors. Their conversations paused as Martin walked by, not with curiosity, but with the casual disregard reserved for maintenance workers and delivery drivers. "Okay, Sasha stopped abruptly at a workstation tucked between the printer and a supply closet. The desk faced a wall, isolated from the collaborative energy that pulsed through the rest of the floor. "This is you. Login credentials should be in your email, which you'll get after you log in," which she gestured vaguely at the computer. "You know how this works, right?" Martin looked at the blank screen, then back at Sasha. "Actually, I'm not sure about the initial. Google it." The words came out before he could finish his sentence, delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A few nearby colleagues glanced over, and Martin caught the subtle exchange of looks, the kind of eye contact that said, "Here we go again. I just need to know which system." "Look, Martin," Sasha's voice carried just loud enough for the surrounding desks to hear. "We're not really a hand-holding kind of place. Everyone here's pretty self-sufficient, independent, you know?" She paused, letting the implication settle. "I'm sure you'll figure it out." Behind her, a young woman with elaborate nail art snorted softly. "Another legacy hire," she whispered to her desk mate, who grinned and shook his head. Martin felt heat rise in his chest, not anger, but something deeper, recognition. This was his company, built on principles of mentorship and collaborative growth, now operating like a machine that consumed people instead of developing them. "Of course," he said simply. "Thank you." Sasha was already walking away, her attention claimed by her phone. Martin turned to the computer, staring at the login screen that might as well have been written in hieroglyphics for all the context he'd been given. "Excuse me?" A gentle voice broke through his concentration. Martin looked up to see Luis Mercado pushing a cart loaded with cleaning supplies. The man's face was weathered but kind, framed by graying hair and laugh lines that spoke of resilience rather than bitterness. "You look lost, friend," Luis said quietly, glancing around to make sure Sasha was out of earshot. "Just a little," Martin admitted. "The bathroom is down that hall, water cooler is by the windows," and Luis leaned closer, pointing discreetly at the computer. "Username is usually first initial, last name. Password gets emailed to your personal account." "Thank you," Martin said, and meant it more than Luis could possibly know. "We all start somewhere." Luis squeezed Martin's shoulder gently. "Don't let them make you feel small. You matter." As Luis wheeled his cart away, Martin felt a strange sense mixed with grief. Here was a man who understood dignity in a place that had forgotten how to practice it. The rest of the morning passed in a series of small humiliations, password resets that required supervisor approval, system access that had been incorrectly configured, training materials that existed only as broken links in outdated emails. Each obstacle required asking for help, and each request was met with variations of the same response. Figure it out yourself. By lunch, Martin had managed to access exactly 2 of the 7 systems he needed to do his job. He sat alone in the corner of the break room, unwrapping a sandwich he'd packed at home, watching the social dynamics play out around him. Sasha held court at the center table, regaling her audience with stories of weekend adventures and career ambitions. Her laugh was loud and performative, designed to be heard rather than felt. She caught sight of Martin in his corner and stage whispered, "Some people just aren't built for the startup pace, you know?" The comment drew knowing nods and barely suppressed smiles. Martin chewed his sandwich slowly, tasting something bitter that had nothing to do with the bread. He pulled out his phone and opened a note-taking app, typing quietly. Day 1, culture looks polished, feels hollow. The afternoon brought more of the same. Error messages that could have been resolved in minutes with proper guidance instead stretched into hour-long struggles. Processes that had been designed for collaboration had been twisted into gatekeeping mechanisms. Knowledge that should have been shared freely was hoarded like precious resources. As the day wound down, Martin found himself genuinely exhausted, not from the work, which was simple enough, but from the constant low-level stress of navigating hostility disguised as professionalism. He was packing up his things when Luis appeared again, this time emptying the trash bins near Martin's desk. "How was your first day?" Luis asked quietly. "Educational," Martin replied. Luis nodded knowingly. "It gets better." Some days he paused in his work. "You seem like good people. Hang in there." As Martin rode the elevator down, he caught his reflection in the polished steel doors. The man looking back at him wore the same face he'd worn for 53 years, but something in his eyes had changed. There was hurt there, yes, but also clarity. For the first time in decades, he wasn't seeing his company through the comfortable filter of executive reports and quarterly metrics. He was seeing it as his employees saw it as a place where humanity went to diminish rather than grow. The elevator doors opened onto the marble lobby, and Martin stepped out into the evening air. Above him, lights twinkled in the tower windows, his employees working late, grinding through deadlines in a culture that mistook busy for productive, fast for efficient, hard for smart. He walked slowly to his car, pulling out his phone one more time. The note from earlier stared back at him, a single line that somehow contained an entire revelation. He added a second line. "Tomorrow I learn what leadership really looks like from the bottom up." The city lights blurred slightly as Martin started his car. 20 years of building, and he'd constructed something beautiful on the outside and hollow within. But recognition, he told himself, was the first step toward redemption. He had 4 more days to understand how badly he'd failed his people, and then, perhaps, he could begin to make it right. The second morning arrived, gray and drizzling. San Francisco's famous fog rolling through the financial district like smoke from some invisible fire. Martin stood at his bathroom mirror, transforming once again from CEO to cipher. The sweater outfit felt marginally more familiar today, though no less heavy with their implications. He'd spent the evening researching his own company's employee handbook, a document he'd approved but apparently never truly read. On paper, Meridian Technologies promoted collaboration, mentorship, and work-life balance. In reality, he was discovering something else entirely. "Morning, Martin." Sasha's greeting was perfunctory as she swept past his workstation, arms full of printouts and energy drinks. She didn't slow down or make eye contact. "Big day today. Try to keep up." The morning began with a team huddle around Sasha's desk, a daily ritual that served more as performance art than actual communication. Sasha stood while everyone else remained seated, a physical manifestation of hierarchy calculated to reinforce its status rather than encourage participation. "Okay, people, let's talk numbers." Sasha's voice carried artificial enthusiasm. "Yesterday's data entry metrics were solid, but we need to push harder. Quality is nice, but speed is what pays the bills." She gestured toward a whiteboard covered in charts and graphs, productivity metrics that reduced human effort to colorful lines and percentages. Martin recognized some of the tracking systems. He'd approved their implementation years ago with the understanding they'd identify areas where employees needed additional support. Now, he realized, with growing horror, they were being weaponized. "Now, I know some of you are still adjusting to our pace." Sasha's eyes swept the group, lingering pointedly on Martin, "But adjustment period or not, we all need to contribute. The company doesn't run on participation trophies." A few people chuckled nervous laughter of employees who'd learned that agreement was safer than silence. Martin felt his jaw tighten but said nothing. Kira, the young receptionist, raised her hand tentatively. "What if someone needs help with resources? Are available." Sasha cut her off smoothly. "Documentation, online tutorials, Google, we're all adults here. We can figure things out." As the group dispersed, Martin caught Kira's expression, disappointed but unsurprised, like someone who'd learned not to expect support, but hadn't yet stopped hoping for it. The morning stretched into small revelations, each more troubling than the last. Martin watched his employees navigate unnecessarily complex systems, processes that had grown bureaucratic through layers of optimization that optimized nothing but frustration. When people struggled, they struggled alone. When they succeeded, their victories were claimed by others. Around 11, Martin witnessed something that stopped him cold. A young developer named James, maybe 25, with the eager face of someone still new enough to care, approached Sasha's desk with a question about database queries. Martin couldn't hear the conversation, but he could read the body language. James's increasing anxiety, Sasha's impatient gestures, the moment when James's shoulders sagged in defeat. 5 minutes later, Martin watched James disappear into the men's restroom. Something in the young man's posture, the careful control of someone trying not to break down in public, made Martin follow. He found James in the far stall, sitting fully clothed on the toilet seat, head in his hands. The young man's breathing was ragged, the sound of someone fighting tears and losing. Martin stood frozen, unsure whether to announce his presence or retreat quietly. The decision was made for him when the restroom door opened and Luis entered, wheeling a small cart of supplies. Luis took in the scene immediately: the occupied stall, the quiet sounds of distress. Without hesitation, he knocked gently on the stall door. "You okay in there, mijo?" There was a pause, then James's voice, thick with emotion. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just need a minute." "Take all the time you need," Luis said softly. "But if you want to talk, I'll be right here." Martin watched, transfixed, as Luis began quietly restocking paper towels and soap dispensers, making himself available without being intrusive, offering support without demanding explanation. It was perhaps the most graceful act of leadership Martin had ever witnessed, and it was coming from a man whose name probably didn't appear on any organizational chart. After a few minutes, James emerged from the stall, eyes red but composed. He looked surprised to see Martin, but managed a weak smile. "Long morning," James said by way of explanation. "I hear you," Martin replied quietly. Luis handed James a paper towel. "Some days are harder than others. That doesn't make you weak, that makes you human." James nodded, his gratitude evident. "Thanks, Luis. You always know what to say." "I just remember what it felt like to be new," Luis said, "and how much it meant when someone was kind to me." After James left, Martin found himself alone with Luis. In the echo-filled space, "That happens a lot?" Martin asked. Luis was quiet for a long moment, methodically wiping down sinks. "More than it should," he finally said. "Good people, smart people, coming in here excited to contribute. Then they learn that asking questions makes them look stupid. Making mistakes makes them look weak. Needing help makes them look incompetent." He paused, meeting Martin's eyes in the mirror. "So they stop asking, stop admitting mistakes, stop seeking help, and pretty soon, they're drowning in silence." "How long has it been like this?" "It got worse about 2 years ago. New management, philosophy, they called it. Accountability culture. But accountability without support just becomes blame." Luis shrugged. "The fish rots from the head. You know? Leadership sets the tone, and the tone here is not good." Martin felt something crack inside his chest. The fish rots from the head. He was the head. The afternoon brought more observations, each adding weight to growing culpability. He watched Sasha publicly praise herself for resolving a system glitch that Martin had quietly fixed the night before, staying late, using his administrative access to correct a database configuration error that had been frustrating his colleagues. For weeks, talented employees proposed innovative solutions, only to have their ideas dismissed if they couldn't be implemented immediately. He watched knowledge hoarding masquerade as expertise, and gatekeeping disguise itself as quality control. Most painfully, he watched his own employees, people whose salaries he signed, whose benefits he provided, whose careers he'd thought he was fostering, treated like disposable resources rather than valuable humans. Around 4 o'clock, exhausted by observation, Martin decided to take action. There was a recurring system timeout error that had been plaguing the data team for months, something he could fix in 5 minutes with a simple configuration change. Instead of using his administrative access, he decided to suggest the solution through proper channels. He approached Sasha's desk during a brief lull in her phone calls. "I think I might have figured out that timeout issue everyone's been having." Sasha looked up from her screen with barely concealed irritation. "What timeout issue?" "The database connection that drops every 20 minutes? I noticed it's probably a connection pool setting that needs." Martin. Sasha's voice carried the patronizing tone usually reserved for small children and large dogs. "I appreciate your enthusiasm, but system architecture isn't really your department. Maybe focus on getting your own tasks finished before trying to solve everyone else's problems." "I understand, but this would literally take 5 minutes to look." Sasha stood up, placing herself physically above him. "I've been managing technical teams since before you got here. I think I can handle our system configurations without input from data entry." The conversation had attracted attention from nearby desks. Colleagues looked up from their screens with the uncomfortable interest of people watching a car accident. Martin felt heat rise in his face, not embarrassment for himself, but rage at the public dismissal of what could have been a helpful contribution. "Of course," he said quietly. "You're right. I'll focus on my own work." That evening, Martin sat in his car in the parking garage for 20 minutes before starting the engine. The timeout era would continue plaguing his employees because pride mattered more than problem solving. Solutions would be ignored because they came from the wrong person. Good ideas would die because hierarchy was more important than help. Pulled out his phone and added to his growing notes. Day 2. The culture isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design, by leaders who value being right over doing right. As he drove home through the fog-shrouded streets, Martin realized that going undercover hadn't just shown him what his company had become. It had shown him what kind of leader he'd been. Kind who signed policies from an executive suite without understanding how they played out on the ground floor. Tomorrow, he would push harder. He would see just how far this toxic culture extended and how deep his own failure ran. Wednesday arrived with uncharacteristic sunshine. Martin had spent the night using his executive access to implement the database fix he'd tried to suggest to Sasha. The timeout error that had been frustrating the data team for months was now resolved. Team huddle. Sasha's voice rang across the floor with unusual excitement. "Everyone, let's gather around. I've got some great news to share." Martin joined the reluctant circle of colleagues who'd learned that Sasha's enthusiasm usually meant more work for everyone else. "So, you know that database timeout issue we've all been dealing with?" Sasha paused for dramatic effect. "I'm happy to announce that I've resolved it." Completely. Martin felt his stomach drop. It took some serious digging into the system architecture. Sasha continued, clearly enjoying the attention. "But I identified the root cause connection pool configuration that was never properly optimized." She gestured toward the whiteboard, where she'd drawn an unnecessarily complex diagram. "The solution required deep knowledge of enterprise database management, which is why it took someone with my background to crack it." James, the young developer who'd been struggling, looked particularly impressed. "Wow, Sasha, that's amazing. How did you figure it out?" "Experience," Sasha replied smugly. "Years of working with enterprise systems." Martin felt something cold and hard crystallize in his chest. This wasn't just credit theft, it was manufactured expertise built on his own work. "Actually," Martin said quietly, "I think that fix might have been implemented by someone else." The circle fell silent. Sasha's smile froze. "Excuse me? The database configuration? I noticed it was working yesterday afternoon, right after I suggested the connection pool adjustment." Sasha's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Martin, database fixes don't just happen magically because someone suggests them in passing. They require administrative access, specialized knowledge, and proper implementation protocols." "I understand that," Martin said, his voice carrying a steel edge. "I'm just saying the timing suggests. The timing suggests that I worked late yesterday evening to solve a complex technical problem while you were probably at home watching TV." Sasha's voice was rising, attracting attention from across the floor. "And now you're trying to take credit for professional work that frankly, you're not qualified to understand, let alone perform." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Martin felt the weight of every eye in the room. "I'm not trying to take credit," Martin said calmly. "I'm just trying to clarify what actually happened." "What actually happened?" Sasha stepped closer, her voice loud enough to carry across the entire floor. "Is that you've been here 2 days, and you're already trying to undermine your team lead. What exactly is your background, Martin?" The question was designed to humiliate, to expose him as unqualified. Martin looked around the circle of faces, sympathetic. Some uncomfortable, some clearly enjoying the spectacle. For a moment, he considered revealing himself. Instead, he said quietly, "You're right. I apologize for overstepping." But Sasha wasn't finished. "Look, Martin, contribution means staying in your lane and doing the work you're actually qualified to do. Database architecture isn't something you can just Google and suddenly understand." The irony was suffocating. Here was someone lecturing him about the systems he'd personally designed, using expertise borrowed from his own solution. "You're absolutely right," Martin said, his voice dangerously level. "I should focus on my own responsibilities." The afternoon brought one final confrontation. During a team meeting, Sasha was presenting metrics with her usual performative confidence. Having co-opted the database fix into her narrative of technical leadership, "Questions?" she asked, expecting none. Martin raised his hand. "I was wondering about the connection between individual recognition and team performance. When one person takes credit for collaborative efforts, how does that impact overall morale?" Sasha's face went red. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but my leadership approach has consistently delivered results." "You're right," Martin said, standing up slowly. This isn't the right forum for this discussion. But instead of sitting down, he kept standing. The room fell silent as he looked around the table. "I want to thank everyone for an educational experience," he said quietly. "I've learned a lot about leadership in the past 3 days, about the difference between managing and mentoring, between authority and respect, between claiming credit and earning it." He picked up his notebook. I think it's time for me to move on to an environment that better aligns with my values. Sasha stood abruptly. Martin, if you're threatening to quit over a simple misunderstanding, not threatening, Martin said, calmly, just recognizing that some cultures can't be changed from the inside by people who lack the authority to make structural changes. He walked toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think this company has tremendous potential. The only thing missing is leadership that understands the difference between position and presence. You can't just walk out. There are procedures. HR needs to process your resignation properly. Martin turned back one last time. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. There are procedures, and tomorrow morning, I'll make sure they're followed properly. He pulled a small folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Kira. Thank you for trying to be kind, he said simply. Don't let this place change that about you. Then he walked out, leaving behind stunned silence and one very nervous team lead who was beginning to realize she might have just made a very expensive mistake. Tomorrow, he would reveal himself. Tomorrow, accountability would have a different meaning, entirely, of things. I know which managers actually work late, and which ones just send emails at midnight to look busy. I know which department heads care about their people, and which ones care about their performance reviews. And I know when someone gets thrown under the bus for speaking truth that makes other people uncomfortable. Luis leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. That woman has been taking credit for other people's work since the day she got promoted. But she's good at managing up and terrible at managing down. Which means the people above her love her, and the people below her suffer. How do you know all this? Luis smiled sadly. Because invisible people see everything. Janitors, security guards, administrative assistants were the ones who empty trash cans full of resignation letters, who clean up after late-night crying sessions, who hear the phone calls when people think no one's listening. He paused, studying Martin's face. The question is, what are you going to do about it? What can I do? I'm just data entry. Are you? Luce's eyes held a depth that made Martin uncomfortable. Because you don't carry yourself like data entry. You don't talk like data entry. And you sure don't know enterprise database architecture like data entry. Martin felt exposed, like Luis could see through his carefully constructed disguise. I don't know what you mean. Maybe not, Luis said, standing up slowly. But whoever you really are, I hope you remember that there are good people in this place. People who deserve better than what they're getting. As Luis walked away, Martin felt the weight of expectation and recognition. Somehow, without revealing himself, he'd been seen. And with that visibility came responsibility. The afternoon brought one final confrontation. During a team meeting about quarterly goals, Sasha was presenting metrics and projections with her usual performative confidence. She'd co-opted the database fix into a broader narrative about her technical leadership, weaving it into a story of innovation and problem-solving that bore no resemblance to reality. Questions? She asked, clearly expecting none. Martin raised his hand. Yes, Martin? Her voice carried the weary patience of someone dealing with a persistent child. I was wondering about the connection between individual recognition and team performance. When one person takes credit for collaborative efforts, how does that impact overall morale and productivity? The question was carefully phrased, professional and theoretical, but its implications were clear to everyone in the room. Sasha's face went red. I'm not sure what you're implying, but my leadership approach has consistently delivered results. If you have specific concerns about team dynamics, perhaps we should discuss them privately, rather than wasting everyone's time with vague theoretical questions. You're right, Martin said, standing up slowly. This isn't the right forum for this discussion, but instead of sitting down, he kept standing. The room fell silent as he looked around the table, making eye contact with each of his colleagues. I want to thank everyone for an educational experience, he said quietly. I've learned a lot about leadership in the past 3 days, about the difference between managing and mentoring, between authority and respect, between claiming credit and earning it. He picked up his notebook and pen from the table. I think it's time for me to move on to an environment that better aligns with my values. Sasha stood up abruptly. Martin, if you're threatening to quit over a simple misunderstanding, not threatening, Martin said calmly, just recognizing that some cultures can't be changed from the inside by people who lack the authority to make structural changes. He walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I think this company has tremendous potential. Good systems, smart people, innovative products. The only thing missing is leadership that understands the difference between position and presence. As he reached for the door handle, Sasha's voice followed him, sharp with authority and desperation. You can't just walk out of a meeting. There are procedures, protocols. HR needs to process your resignation properly. Martin turned back one last time, his hand still on the door handle. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. There are procedures, and tomorrow morning, I'll make sure they're followed properly. He pulled a small folded piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Kira, who was sitting closest to the door. Thank you for trying to be kind, he said simply. Don't let this place change that about you. Then he walked out. leaving behind a room full of stunned silence and one very nervous team lead who was beginning to realize that she might have just made a very expensive mistake. The elevator doors closed on Martin's calm face, but inside his chest, his heart was pounding with the rhythm of revolution. Tomorrow, he would reveal himself. Tomorrow, accountability would have a different meaning entirely. Tonight, he had calls to make and policies to review. Because real leadership, he was beginning to understand, meant taking responsibility not just for success, but for failure. And he had 3 days' worth of failures to answer for. Thursday morning arrived with crystalline clarity. Martin stood in his walk-in closet, choosing between two versions of himself: the humble data entry worker in worn coveralls, or the CEO in a tailored charcoal suit. He chose the suit. The phone calls had lasted until midnight. Legal review, HR consultation, board notification. By 9:15, the entire data operations team would be gathered for what they believed was a routine meeting with a visiting board member. By 9:30, everything would change. Martin arrived through the executive parking garage, taking the private elevator for the first time in months. At 9:10, he positioned himself in the executive conference room's anteroom, watching through one-way glass as his employees filed in. Sasha had chosen a navy blazer and carried a leather portfolio. Kira looked nervous. James sat near the back, still carrying his defeated posture, and there was Louis, specifically invited despite not being part of the data operations team. At exactly 9:15, he walked through the main conference room doors. The effect was immediate and electric. Conversations stopped mid-spin. Sasha looked up with the bright smile of someone preparing to impress an important visitor. The smile died as recognition flickered across her face, replaced by confusion, then dawning horror. "Good morning," Martin said quietly. "For those who don't know me, I'm Martin Quinn. I founded this company 20 years ago, and I currently serve as CEO." The silence stretched thick with shock. Martin walked slowly around the conference table, making eye contact with each person. "I'd like to thank everyone for an enlightening week. I've learned more about this company in 3 days than I had in the previous 3 years." He stopped walking and turned to face the room. "Last Monday morning, I walked through our lobby doors dressed as a new data entry hire. I wanted to understand what it felt like to be a new employee in the company I'd built." Kira's hand flew to her mouth. James straightened in his chair. Luis smiled the knowing expression of someone whose suspicions had just been confirmed, and Sasha had gone pale, her portfolio clutched against her chest like armor. "What I discovered was a workplace that had become unrecognizable to me. A culture where asking for help was treated as weakness, where knowledge was hoarded rather than shared, where new employees were abandoned to sink or swim." He pulled out his phone and opened his notes. "Day 1, I was told to Google it when I asked for basic login information. Day 2, I watched a colleague break down in tears because he couldn't get support. Day 3, I had my expertise questioned, and my contributions dismissed by someone who then took credit for my work. The room was so quiet that the air conditioning seemed loud. But I also discovered something else," Martin said, his tone softening. "I discovered that there are people in this organization who understand what leadership really means." He looked directly at Luis. "Luis Mercado has been with this company for 12 years. He's shown more genuine care for employee well-being than any manager I observed. He helped me when no one else would. He comforted a crying colleague when no one else noticed." Luis's eyes were bright with emotion. "Effective immediately," Martin continued. "Luis will be joining our leadership team as Director of Culture and Employee Experience. His first task will be developing a mentorship program that ensures no new employee ever feels as lost as I did on Monday morning." Luis looked stunned, then deeply moved. Martin turned to Kira. Kira showed compassion and concern even when uncertain about protocol. "She'll be joining our management training program and will work directly with Luis on culture initiatives." Kira burst into tears, the good kind, from recognition rather than dismissal. Then Martin's gaze found James. "James, you asked thoughtful questions and showed genuine interest in learning. You'll be working with our senior developers on the database optimization project, properly credited to all contributors." Finally, Martin turned to Sasha. The room held its breath. "Sasha," he said quietly, "your management style has created significant problems. Taking credit for others' work, dismissing legitimate questions, creating an environment where people are afraid to ask for help. These behaviors are inconsistent with our values." Sasha's face was red, but she remained silent. "However," Martin continued, "I believe in redemption and growth. You'll be enrolled in our executive coaching program and will spend the next 6 months working with HR on developing authentic leadership skills." The consequences were serious, but not career-ending. Martin had chosen accountability over vengeance. "To everyone in this room," Martin said, addressing the entire group, "I owe you an apology. I created policies from an executive suite without understanding how they played out on the ground floor. I built systems that were supposed to support you, but became barriers instead." He paused, letting that acknowledgement settle. "But recognition is the first step toward change. Effective today, we're implementing several new policies: mandatory mentorship for all new hires, quarterly culture assessments, and an open-door policy that actually means something. Martin walked to the windows overlooking the city below. Leadership isn't about having the biggest office or the fanciest title, he said. It's about service. It's about creating environments where people can do their best work and grow into their potential. It's about remembering that every person in this building matters not because of their position, but because of their humanity. He turned back to face the room. I hope you'll give me the chance to earn back your trust. I hope you'll help me build something better. And I hope you'll remember that real leadership happens not when people are watching, but when they're not. As the meeting dispersed, Luis was the first to reach him. Thank you, Luis said simply, for seeing, for caring, for doing something about it. Thank you, Martin replied, for showing me what leadership looks like. Later that afternoon, Martin walked past the help desk where a young woman was asking Kira about login procedures. Let me walk you through it, Kira said with a warm smile. And if you have any other questions, any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask. We're here to help. Martin smiled and kept walking. Change was already beginning, a leadership legacy, as Martin reflects on his undercover experience. He realizes that true leadership isn't about commanding from above, it's about understanding from within. The greatest leaders aren't those who demand respect, but those who earn it through humility and service. Just like how this story taught us that authentic leadership comes from genuine care for others, I hope it inspired you to think about your own leadership style. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about character, growth, and the power of humility in leadership. Remember, position may give you authority, but only presence gives you influence. See you in the next story.